All right, we got it. Okay, so I'm going to start with sharing my screen. And then I guess I really didn't introduce myself that well. I am Chris Nelson. Well, I got a slide in there to make me do this. So we'll just jump in with my talk. So this is a rerun of a talk I gave last week at Chicago JS in person. And they didn't have a chance to record it, and we didn't have anybody on the schedule for this month, so I'm kind of doing a rerun. So for those that have come to Cincinnati JS a bunch of times, some of the stuff is going to be familiar and stuff you've already seen, so I'll just like apologize in advance. Anyway, that's what we're doing. So I am the co-founder of LaunchScout. We are a custom software development company here in Cincinnati. We mainly do web and mobile apps across a variety of industries and sizes of organizations, everywhere from, startup with an idea and some funding to Fortune, very small number, and everything in between. That's me. I've been a web developer for a very long time, really doing web application development since web applications were a thing that existed. I won't bore you with all the different things that I've done, but I will say I am currently a big fan of a couple things. Elixir is a programming language that we use at LaunchScout a lot, and we really dig. I won't go into too much Elixir because this is the JavaScript users group. But what I will talk more about is another thing that I'm into, which is web components, or more specifically, custom HTML elements. And we'll talk about why I think they're a really good fit for the topic that I'm covering today. I already told you I'm co-founder of LaunchScout, but what the heck are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about what even is an embedded web app. We're going to talk a little bit about how people usually build them, and I'm going to try to sort of make the case that there's a better approach for building them. And the main example I'm going to look at is the humble shopping cart, and how you might go about it to adding it to a website that is just static HTML. And we'll kind of iteratively look at that. I'll show you a simpler example so that we can actually go through the code and understand all the pieces. And then I will take that same example and show you sort of it more grown up and productized and talk about that a bit. So that's the plan. And I'm going to jump in. So what even do I mean by an embedded web app? And I guess I will also say, hey, I'm going to pick on you, Alex. Could you keep an eye on the chat? And if there are questions, maybe like jump in and interrupt at a good point or something.
Yeah, I got you.
Cool, thanks. So an embedded web app is really kind of what it sounds. It's an application that is designed to live inside of a larger application. And a lot of times, the best examples are, I have a website and I want to add a third-party thing to add some functionality to that website. And there are lots of examples of this out in the wild, and there kind of have been for a pretty long time. If I have a website, there are lots of things that I can do to add things like a contact form, or if I'm using, like we are at LaunchScout, we're using like a service to manage our, when we hire, our recruiting process and job apps and tracking candidates and all that stuff. And one of the things they give us is an embeddable job application form that we can drop into our website and have people fill out. You'll see this with surveys, also comment sections. If you're having a blog, there are a lot of different providers. I've built one of these too, as an example, where you can just like add a comment section to your website. And then a very small version of this would be a buy button. Usually these are just buttons that will like redirect you somewhere else to continue the checkout. And that's kind of what I started with for my example, but I expanded on that a good bit. And we'll get to that when we get to that. I think the kind of thing I'm talking about with embedded web apps, you could also sort of like the techniques that I'm going to be talking about are definitely applicable to micro front ends as well. Micro front ends are kind of like if I have a really large complex organization or website, where I have multiple teams working on different components of a page, that kind of approach can be described as micro front ends. I, in full honesty, haven't built, well, no, I guess that's not true. I have been involved in organizations that did kind of take that approach. I guess what I can't say is like, I'm a huge fan and you should definitely do that. There are only very specific situations where that is even something you want to consider, and it gets really complicated and difficult. So anyway, that's all probably I'll say about micro front ends. But if you have specific questions, we can maybe get to that later. So applications like this, how do people usually build them? Usually it's like third-party JavaScript. So you add a script tag to your page. And usually it does a couple different things. A lot of times what it'll do is it'll drop an iframe on the page somewhere. Sometimes it'll just like, add extra markup to an element that you specify. But the problems with both of those approaches are, if you have an iframe on the page, the amount of customization that you can do or integrating it with the rest of your page, the options are pretty limited. If there's any ability to customize the look and feel, it's entirely proprietary, and a lot of times there's really not much available. And then, of course, if you have something that's adding extra markup to your page, you have all kinds of challenges with like, does the CSS that you're using on your website conflict with anything going on within that, extra markup that this JavaScript added? And is that going to work out okay? Maybe, maybe not. These options are really less than ideal, I think. And I am here to make the case that we don't have to keep doing it that way. There is now a much better way to do these kinds of applications. And my assertion is that custom HTML elements are a better way to solve this problem. At this point, custom elements are supported by all of the major browsers, and they bring some superior customization options. And really, I would argue they're just the right tool for the job. And we'll hopefully go through why by example. But I want to start with like, sorry, I got another slide here I forgot about, whoops. One of the reasons I think that custom HTML elements are a good way to solve this problem, or is that they give you a better developer experience than we have with iframes. And the reason for this is, I think, pretty simple. Your website's already made of HTML, right? Adding an HTML tag to a website, not a big deal. That's what you do to build the website in general. And with this approach, we're giving you another HTML tag to add to your site. So figuring out where to put it is just the same as you do with any other HTML element. There's no framework commitment. You don't have to decide on React or Vue or whatever to use some third-party tool. And the customization options, because it's just HTML, really are, we'll get to the details here of shadow parts and slots, but essentially what we're talking about is, because it's HTML, you can style it by a CSS if the author of that third-party HTML element allows you to do so. And we'll get into how to do that. You can also use a technique called slots, which lets you embed your own markup within a custom HTML element. So the options that you have for working with HTML, which is, you have elements that contain other elements, and you style those things by a CSS, those same exact things apply to custom HTML elements, because custom HTML elements are just another kind of HTML element. So let's get into some specifics. I'm assuming not everybody has seen custom HTML elements, so I'm going to start with like a little tiny crash course in what this even looks like. So what I have here is a very simple HTML element. And the way that you create custom HTML elements is you have a class that extends HTML element. And HTML element is a thing that is available inside of your browser already. There is no library that you need to include to give you this class that you're extending. That's just part of your browser. It's how your browser builds HTML internally already. So when you make a class that extends from HTML element, what you can do is define functions that define how that element works. And the main function that is kind of the starting point a lot of the times is connected callback. Connected callback is a function that is invoked by your browser when your HTML element is connected to the DOM. The thing that I'm demoing there inside of this callback. So inside of this callback, you can do whatever you want. You could just, call other, built-in browser functions to add HTML to the page really wherever you wanted to. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm saying this. So in this is going to be the element instance itself, just to clarify that. This attached shadow is doing something called adding a shadow DOM to that page. I'm not going to have time to get into deep details about shadow DOM, but to summarize very briefly, a shadow DOM is a self-contained isolated DOM within a DOM. And what this actually means is inside of the element, and I'll show you this in like 30 seconds, inside of an element, I have a DOM that is isolated from the rest of the page. And what that allows me to do is if I'm creating a custom HTML element, I can, as the author, define very precisely the look and feel of it without worrying about the rest of the page. And I can define the level of interaction there in terms of what the page surrounding me can style. So in this case, in this very simple example, I have a little style tag and I'm saying all of the divs in this DOM should be blue. And then I have an H1 with part, which we'll talk about shortly, where I say, hi, Cincinnati.js. And then I have a div that says it's great to meet you. So let's see what this looks like. Oops, not quite what I meant to do, but that's okay. We'll fix it. I meant to hit control so I didn't lose my place in my slides. So this is our very simple example. And we see hi, Cincinnati.js. We see it's great to meet you. And then we have another element within the page. Let's go actually look at the source code for the page though. This is custom elements 1. So this is the source code, the entire source code for this page, pretty small. We have in the body, we have our Cincinnati.js, and that guy will render that hi, Cincinnati.js. It's great to meet you. We see another div, and if we look at the page, that div, as it says, isn't blue. And that is demonstrating, oh man, quit doing that. That is demonstrating that shadow DOM that I talked about, which basically is like this CSS here only applies inside the custom element and doesn't apply outside the custom element. So that's the simplest custom element example I can kind of come up with there. And we'll just keep going. So let's talk about slots and parts just a little bit. And this kind of gets in a little bit more advanced custom HTML elements. But they really, these two tools, slots and parts, they are what allows people creating custom elements to give as much control over the look and feel of how those custom elements appear as they want to. So I showed you that by default, if you're using a shadow DOM, like what's going on in there is self-contained. But a lot of times what you want to do is like provide the ability for people using your element to customize the look and feel just in the ways that you want to allow. And that's what you can do with slots and parts. Slots are what control the markup that is used within your custom element, and parts let you provide hooks to style the inside of your custom elements DOM from the outside. And I think this is easier to see by example, but if you are within a shadow DOM and you have an element that has a part attribute, what that does is say like somebody who's using this element can style this specific part. And there's a CSS selector that the surrounding page can use to do it. Let's go look at this. And we'll see another Cincy.js tag, but we got a little bit more going on. So let's look at custom elements 2. And we'll see that we have a part for the H1 and a div, and then we have a slot element. And now when we're using our tag, we have some markup within it. And what that slot says is whatever's inside this tag, put it here. If I had, you can have multiple slots with names. That gets a little more complicated, and I just don't have time to have an example of this. I'm going to be pretty tight on time as it is because we have a lot to cover. But that's a very simple example of a slot. That part thing, I said that like if you define a part inside of a shadow DOM, that means the surrounding page can style it. Here's what it looks to do that. I have some style CSS, I have some CSS just going on the page, and I'm using a part selector here. And the syntax here is I'd say the element : part, and then the name of the part. And that basically says, hey, within this Cincy.js tag, there's a part called header, and I want you to make it green. And that is what causes that H1 to be green. So the author of the tag is saying you are allowed to style this thing. All right, let's keep going. So I want to mention lit element. I'm not going to try to go into lit element. That would be another talk by itself. I will make use of it, so I just want to tell you what's going on there. It's a very small library to make custom elements even easier to build. It's not a framework, really. It's a library. It's much smaller in scope. And the couple things that it gives you that are really nice to have, it gives you basically kind of an experience which it's similar to React in that if you have properties that you define on your custom element instance, anytime those properties change, it will trigger a re-render of that element automatically. It also gives you a nice templating syntax. And those are the main things that I like about it. The good news is lit elements just a library to make custom elements easy, right? If you don't, use it if you like it. But it doesn't it doesn't require a big commitment, and there are lots and lots of other libraries for working with custom HTML elements. I'm getting a little bit of noise. Okay, I think it was that person. Anyway, Sorry, back to it. So I've talked so far just about the front end with custom HTML elements. I'm going to shift gears now and talk about the back end. So typically, if I'm writing, if I'm writing an app like this that's designed to be embedded on a website, I have some backend functionality. Typically, the way that my front end JavaScript is going to interact with my backend is by calling an API. And mainly at this point, there are kind of two choices for those. For how I want to have that API communication work. Typically, we're going to be talking about REST, or we're going to be talking about GraphQL. And they each have pros and cons. I'm not going to go into them. But what they have in common is if I'm building an application where I'm building a JavaScript front end talking to a backend application, things kind of get complicated. And they get complicated fairly quickly. I have a lot more problems to solve. I have to manage my state on both the front end and the back end. I have like 2 tiers of state to manage. And in a lot of ways, I'm really building 2 applications. I'm building a front end app and a back end app. Obviously, they have to work together. But in a lot of ways, it ends up feeling like I'm building, it's twice as much effort as it would be if I were just building a single server-side rendered app, for example. And I've got one thing in chat. The shadow DOM, that is determined by where the custom element appears on the page. Here is my, what I'd really love in an ideal world for building these kinds of apps. What I'd like to be able to do, I'd like to have the state on the server be the source of truth for my application. And I'd like my client code to be really, really simple. Really, if I could keep my client code as simple as I want, I would just have it do 3 things. I would have it render the current state. I would have it dispatch events to the server and receive state updates from the server. So that sounds great, hopefully. But the question is, how do I get there? And that's kind of the main focus of what I'm talking about today. So what I've created to make this possible to do is a couple libraries that work together that I'm calling live state. And it's the way it works is there's a library for the front end and for the back end, and they work together to allow this style of development to be possible. The front end NPM package is called phx-live-state. The PHX is short for Phoenix, which is a technology that I'm leveraging under the covers. And what this thing does is it sends and receives custom events over WebSockets. We didn't have a chance to talk about custom events yet, but I'll show you an example here in a minute. Custom DOM events are exactly what they sound like. They're just DOM events, but you can name them anything you want, and you can give them a payload that is whatever you want to put in it. The front end library also will receive state updates over WebSockets. And the other thing that it can do is it can manage that state on custom element properties. On the back end, there's an Elixir library called live_state that handles the events that are sent over WebSockets. it computes the new state and it sends state updates back down to the clients. So that's a lot. We're going to go through an example, and what I'm hoping is it will make a little bit more sense. Just briefly, what even is Elixir? I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip trying to describe Elixir other than briefly. It's a server-side functional language that we like a lot. It's really good at high concurrency, high availability kind of apps. All right. So this front-end library, I'm going to go in a little bit more detail on it, and then we'll see the example. It is it's written in TypeScript, and the way it works under the covers, there's kind of different levels of abstraction depending on what you're doing. There's a low-level API called live state for connecting to the backend. There's a slightly higher level function that you can actually like connect a custom element to the backend. And then there's a TypeScript decorator that allows you to like declaratively annotate your custom element and tell it to connect to live state. So just to sort of mention briefly what's going on when you use that decorator, you need to give it a URL to connect to. You need to give it a topic, and that's so that you could have like multiple things going on at the same URL. Optionally, you might have some other connection params. You might have some properties of that custom element that you want live state to manage. And then you might also have some events that an element can dispatch or receive. If you have multiple elements on the page that are all connected to the same live state backend, there's a mechanism for those to find each other so that they can share a single state between them. And we'll see that here in a second. And we are now going to dive into our example. So our example project is called Stripe Cart. And the scenario that I'm trying to solve with Stripe Cart, imagine that you have a website that uses maybe a static site generator, or maybe it's just like plain old HTML files that are just like served up. Maybe they live in S3, maybe they're just, but there's no backend necessary at all. For static site generators, I'm talking about things like 11D, Gatsby, things like that, that produce the HTML kind of ahead of time. So if you have a site that's just plain old HTML, let's say now you want to add e-commerce to that site. And in this case, we're using Stripe. So you're going to have a Stripe account with some products set up in that Stripe account. And what we want to do is, if all we wanted to do is like sell one item at a time, we could just have a buy now button where you click a link and then you get redirected to Stripe. But what we'd really like to do is be able to say, I have multiple items that I'm selling. I'd like to add them one at a time to a shopping cart. And then when I'm done, I'd like to check out my entire cart at once. So what would we need to be able to do that? My assertion here is we would need two custom elements to be able to get this done. We would need a Stripe cart custom element, and this is going to display our cart. It's going to pop a modal open for the details of what's in that cart, and it's going to give us a checkout button that once we are done, we've added multiple items to the cart, presumably, that will then redirect over to Stripe and let us complete the checkout session in Stripe. The other element we're going to need on the page is for each item that we're selling, we're going to want a button essentially to add that item to the cart. And we're going to need to give it a price ID to identify really specifically which item and which price of that item we're trying to add to the cart. The reason it's a price and not a product, that's a little confusing, but the reason we need to do it that way is because Stripe will let you define multiple prices for the same item. And obviously we need to know which one. All right. So on the server, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be, we'll need an API key to connect up to Stripe. And we'll have a couple different events that our front end will send. We'll have an add cart item event, and we'll have a checkout event. Add cart item is just what it sounds. It's going to get which price to add, and it's going to put that item in the cart. And then checkout is, okay, I'm done. And we want to then call Stripe and say, here's everything in the cart. Please give me a URL to redirect to. And then we'll redirect that front end to the URL in Stripe to finish the checkout process. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but let's go through things a bit at a time. And we can definitely answer questions then. So let's see it. So this is a single file website that I have. I'm using Vite to serve it up, but it's just a single one page of HTML. And we'll see that I have two items here. I have a beanie and a wrinkly t-shirt, and add item buttons for both of them. And right away, you'll notice that one add button looks different than the other. And that's on purpose to demonstrate slots, which we haven't talked about, and to kind of show you that the customization options that you get from using custom elements. So let's walk through using this thing. So I'll add the beanie, and then I will add the shirt. And we'll see that our custom element over here for the cart is keeping track of how many items are in the cart. Got that little 2 going on over there. And then if I click it, it expands into a modal. I see everything in the cart. Sorry for the poor rendering in this version of it. But if we hit that checkout button, behind the scenes, it's calling Stripe. It's passing in all of the items that we had in our cart and building a checkout session and redirecting us to it. So a lot going on, but it's pretty fast. So this is Stripe. It's in test mode. And so we can actually use our fake credit card there and finish and hit pay. And we get redirected back to our site. The cart has been cleared. And if we log into Stripe, we can actually see, this is a test account, so obviously everything's pretend, but we can see that payment that we just did on March H1248, which is a minute ago, is actually there in Stripe. So that's kind of the end-to-end experience. And now let's go through what are the pieces that allow this to work. So this is our single HTML file website that I just showed you. We see that we are including, we've got a couple of dependencies here. We're using a library called Shoelace to do the modal, for example. But here are the two elements themselves. We have our Stripe cart add item element and our Stripe cart. And if you were doing this for real, you could package them all into an NPM module and distribute it that way. And that's, in fact, what I ended up doing later. But this is a simplified version of all this for now. And then let's kind of get into the markup itself. We have the header up top, and that is where that stripe cart element lives. Just to show you the page again, not that one. That is the stripe cart element that's giving us that there. If we then go down into the list of products, we basically just have two products, our light shirt and our beanie, and that's all just plain old HTML. And then we have our stripe cart add item, where we pass the price ID from Stripe. And one thing I sort of mentioned earlier, that those buttons look different. And I wanted to demonstrate, let's get both these let's get both of these add item buttons on the page so we can compare them. We'll see that the stripe cart add item elements for the shirt, it is empty. It doesn't have anything in it. And then if we look at the stripe cart add item element for the beanie, we can see that inside of that guy, we have a button with add to cart. This is the example of using slots to be able to customize, working with custom HTML elements. The way this add cart item works, and we'll look at this code here in a few seconds, it will say, if there is an element inside of me, I am going to render it and I'm going to listen for click events on it. And so what this lets me do is, as the author of the page, I can have my own button, style it however I want, and put it inside here. And now this button will add this item to the cart. And this button, because it's part of the surrounding page, that CSS is up to the page author, and so I can make it look nice. If I don't pass anything in, as the author of the custom element, I can give it a default. And that is how this single boring gray add item button is produced. So let's look at stripe cart add item and walk through how it works. So this is definitely the simpler of the two custom elements that we'll look at. I mentioned that I'm using lit element earlier. This is the example of that. And lit element gives us a couple handy things. If you haven't seen TypeScript decorators before, this is what they look like, and I'm making use of them here. They let me kind of annotate classes and give it extra data about those classes. And I don't think I think I kind of glossed over when you're defining a custom element. How do you give it a tag name? This is how this works using this custom element decorator. The tag name for this class is stripe-cart-add item. And then this is the live state decorator that I mentioned earlier. The live state decorator here is what says this element needs to connect up to live state, and then any other information I need to give it. In this case of this element, it's pretty simple. All it does is send a event called add cart item. And because this event is, because I'm telling live state about this event, what that means is when this element dispatches an add cart item event, it's going to be sent up to the backend for me. And then we'll get to how that is processed on the backend in a minute. This context attribute, I'm basically just giving it a name here, and what this says is somewhere else, somebody else is going to define a cart state live state context, and that is the way I'm doing that so that the add item and the cart know about each other and can share state between them. This property here, this basically says that price ID attribute of the element, it ends up as a price ID property on the class instance. And this is where I'm listening to the click event of the button that's going to live inside of this element. When I get a click, I dispatch a custom event called add cart item with a detail property that contains the Stripe price. And then finally, the render is just rendering the slot, and what the fact that there's markup inside the slot basically just is it becomes the default. So anything inside of a slot here basically will let me give a default if nobody passes anything in. I don't know if that was enough explanation, but basically what this says is, hey, if this element is empty, what do I put there? And what it will do is say, hey, whatever's in this slot, if when the element is used, there's nothing inside of it, here's what to put by default. All right. Hopefully that makes sense so far. Let's look at the cart now. The cart gets a little bit more interesting. We're using TypeScript, so we have the type definitions for the structure of the data in the cart. We have cart items and carts and products and straight products. So a lot of things going on here. We have another custom element annotation to give it a tag name. And we have another live state decorator. And because this is providing the live state instance, this is where we define the URL and the topic. We are also giving it a list of properties to manage. In this case, we just give it one. And that basically just says the cart property that is managed by the live state backend for us. And what that means is anytime there are changes to the state of that cart, they will be sent down to the element instance. The provide basically just says there should be, I want you to put the live state instance on the window under the name cart state. And that is what allows the add item to refer to it using that context property. We see the context over here is cart state, and that matches the name that we give it over here. And that's so that those guys will be sharing the same state. We also have events that the cart can dispatch, and in this case, it can actually receive an event as well. It will dispatch a checkout event, and it will receive a checkout redirect event. All right, let's go through and look at the element. Just like we saw the add item instance set up a listener, this one is going to set up a listener as well. It's going to listen for a checkout redirect event. And a checkout redirect event is actually going to be sent from the server after the checkout session on the Stripe side is finished being created. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to redirect that page over to Stripe Stripe will already have all of the items and let you complete the checkout process over there. That item count, we saw that little badge that was updated anytime we added an item. So that guy here, that item count, that's what creates that guy here. We're using SL badge, which is a shoelace element. A shoelace is just a nice library of custom elements that I'm making use of. And then the expand cart is what happens when you click on the cart to actually open that modal. So let's look at render. Render is going to, we see this SL dialog with the table, and this is actually the cart details. Because it's inside of this SL dialog, it's not visible by default. But all the data is actually there already. Anytime we render this element, we're rendering a table with all the details of the cart here with the checkout button. This SL button, that is the little that's the little guy over here. So it's got the little icon and it's got the item count. And what happens is when I click that guy over here, it calls expand cart, which causes the dialog to appear. And so when I click this guy, that's what I get. Let's look at our event handler. He's actually surprisingly small. When I hit that checkout button, that's this guy over here, it dispatches a checkout event, which is handled by the back end. And the only thing that we need to pass it is the URL that we want to come back to. And that is just like wherever it's served from over here. So that's all of the front end code for this, for these two elements. I'm going to sort of show you briefly the back end code, but I'm not going to try to like teach you Elixir in 5 minutes. But I'll at least kind of walk through what's going on. I think it's actually hopefully not as intimidating as you might think if you've never seen Elixir. I think Elixir is a pretty easy language to kind of glance at and understand. But the main thing is these are the event handlers, and they are just directly, they're the same event names as the front end. And they're just, what you would expect. I have, I guess one thing to point out is I have multiple different event handlers for add cart item. The only difference between them is they're handling different cases. One is handling the case that is a brand new cart, so it needs to be created, and one is handling the case where I'm adding an item to an existing cart. The checkout event handler is here. It's calling beneath. I'm not going to walk through that side of the code because it gets a little more complicated, but what it actually is doing over here is it's calling the Stripe API, passing in all of the cart items and getting back what Stripe calls a session, which is like checkout session, really. That session will have a URL, and that's what I send down to the front end to redirect to. So that's kind of like all of the things. Well, not all of the things, because I'm not going to try to show you all the cart code. That would be too much.
You've got a question in chat, Chris, about
See, I've got one question. Yeah. Yes, I will. I will. Yeah, I realize there's a lot here. So I will. Oops, trying to get rid of that chat. Sorry. I will post the slides. There's a repo that contains the slides, and that has links to all of the code repos that I refer to here. I'm going to stop there for questions if there are any, because I'm already, as usual with this talk, I'm running short on time. It's a lot to cover, and I realize that. So you've got one more. Cool. I am going to kind of talk about where. So I originally started this Stripe cart as an idea to demo kind of this whole technique that I had for using custom elements and making them easier to build and work with. But after I made the Stripe cart demo, I kind of started thinking, I wonder if this would actually be really useful to real people with websites. And that made me kind of pursue, what the next steps would be to make that happen. So, what we kind of saw was like a very simple version, but it's obviously lacking some key features that you would need if you were going to use it on a real website. I'm not going to try to go through these. I'm short on time, but what I am going to do, is show you basically what we came up with. And this is something that is in development. If you are building a website and using a static site generator and want to be able to sell a few items, this might be something that you'd be interested in. And I'll just kind of show you how it works. And the reason I want to show you how it works is we are actually looking for people that need to do this and want to help us kind of be beta testers for this whole product, essentially. And I will go and just, let's see, I should have a login already. I'm going to log in with one of my demo accounts that I know works already. Hopefully I chose the right one. Good, I did. So if I am a user of Launch Elements, which is the grown-up version of Stripe Cart, what I need to do first as a brand new user, I would connect my Stripe account. And that uses something called Stripe Connect, which will redirect you over to Stripe and basically just let you connect your Stripe account so that we know we can basically, what we're going to do is we're going to find all your products and be able to create checkout sessions for you. So we see that we connected our Stripe account. We come back here with it connected. The other thing that you do is you create a store. And that store is just something that you give it a name, my new store. We'll choose that new account we just created, hit save. And now we have a new store connected to our Stripe account. And this will just give you instructions for how you would add what we're calling launch elements. We have like a launch dash cart and the launch dash cart add item. That kind of will show you how to add these things to your page. And rather than going through this one by one like this, the other thing that we have is a demo store project that's kind of like the example repo that you can use to see what the experience looks like of adding this to a static site generator website. And we're using something called 11D, which is a really nice JavaScript. It's a very simple to use static site generator. And if I go over there, I think, let's see, do I have all this? I don't think I have this running already.
You've got a question in the chat as well. Whenever you're ready, Chris.
Oh, yes, I am. Oh, great question. WSS is a WebSocket URL. And we're using WebSockets because we have like a bidirectional connection open to the backend. And that's so we can send events up, but we can also get events sent back down. And that's how we receive state changes from the backend. Great question. So let's show you kind of like the demo store. And the thing to point out here that's of interest, we have 3 items instead of 2, but that's not a big deal. The thing that is a little bit more interesting here is we actually have multiple pages on this website. So if I go add a cart here, if I add an item to a cart here, I can also go to the product detail page, and it knows which cart, it's basically synchronizing the cart across multiple pages. It's storing a cart ID in local storage so that it can do that. And that will let me have that cart persist across pages. So it's more of like a real honest to goodness cart that actually works. I've also got like a few more features, like I could add, more than one item. Things look a little bit better. All of this stuff is customizable via CSS. And when I check out, this is still in test mode, obviously, but if I pay and come back, I get a modal thanking me for purchasing. This modal, this is customizable via a slot, so you can have whatever message you want to appear here as the user of this element. So it's pretty fully functional at this point, I would say. If you are interested in that, we would love to have you help us test things out. And the way that you do that is just hit this register button over here and tell us about yourself. So that's kind of everything. I showed you the demo store. If you're interested in obviously, if you have a static website and want to add e-commerce, we would love to have you help us test launch elements. But if you're building an app like this in some other domain, I would love to talk to you and follow up and compare notes. I know where I'm eating dinner. I'm eating dinner at my house. This was from Chicago JS. But last but not least, here is all the, oh man, I'm sorry. The talk here is at Chicago JS. So I'll fix this link and I will post it on the meetup page so that people can find it. I'll also put it in the Cincinnati JavaScript Discord. So yeah, this basically has all the slides in Markdown. These basically are the links to all the different repos that I made use of. StripeCard and StripeCard are these are the front end and back end repos for the simplified version of it. Okay. Are there any questions? I'm a little bit over time, obviously, but that was a lot. If you have more questions later, if you aren't in the Cincinnati JavaScript Discord, I'm pretty sure we have the link to it on the main web page. Yeah. This guy here, that's where you want to go to join our Cincinnati JavaScript Discord. You can hit me up there and ask me any questions that you have. And like I said, I will post the slides there, as well as, I don't know, I'll figure out where it makes sense to post it on Meetup as well. Thanks, everybody. So right now it's just anonymous checkouts only, but that is a great question and definitely something that we would have as like a future feature to be able to add. We don't have it yet though, but great question. Authentication. Yeah, and there are a few more things that obviously are going to make sense to add to this thing. really it's kind of going to be based on like, are there enough people interested? Does this make sense? Are there enough people that are trying to build static websites that that want to do something like this? Okay. Thanks, everybody. If you have a thing that you want to talk about for next month, please hit us up in Discord, or if there's a thing you're interested in hearing about, maybe we can find somebody to talk about it. And Anna, let's keep this conversation going in Discord, just because I got to run, but I really appreciate your questions and interest. All right. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.